What if one of your most basic assumptions about the Bible is simply wrong? What if the person closest to God, the one who heard his voice most clearly, the one entrusted with divine revelation, was never meant to hold all spiritual authority? Most of us instinctively believe the same thing. The nearer someone is to God, the more power they should have. The more revelation they receive, the more leadership they deserve. It sounds logical. It feels right. And yet, Scripture quietly tells a different story. Moses spoke with God face to face. He entered the cloud. He carried the law down the mountain. And yet, when the highest priestly office was established, it did not go to Moses. It went to Aaron, not the man of revelation, but the man of shared suffering. Why would God divide authority this way? Why separate the voice that hears heaven from the hands that stand at the altar? Is this a contradiction in the biblical narrative, or a hidden design meant to protect truth, mercy, and humanity itself? Because if this division was intentional, then it reshapes how we understand leadership. Faith and power, not just in ancient Israel, but in every religious system that came after. To understand why God split authority, we must first look closely at the man who stood before God and the man who stood with the people. Moses is not remembered in Scripture as a conventional leader. He was not chosen for his charisma, his political instincts, or his ability to move crowds. Moses was shaped for a far more unsettling role. He stands in the biblical story as a man of the threshold, the boundary where heaven touches history. Again and again, Scripture places him in a position no one else dares to occupy. When the people remain at the foot of the mountain, Moses ascends. When fear drives the nation backward, Moses steps into the cloud. While the crowd trembles at a distance, Moses listens. This pattern is not poetic coincidence. It reveals design. Moses is the bearer of revelation. He is the one entrusted with law, with covenant, with words that do not originate in human consensus. And here an uncomfortable truth emerges, one that overturns a common assumption about spiritual leadership. Closeness to God does not automatically mean closeness to the people. In fact, Scripture suggests the opposite. The nearer one stands to divine revelation, the greater the distance that must be maintained from the emotional gravity of the crowd. Moses was not placed among the people to absorb their fears or mirror their anxieties. He was positioned facing upward toward heavens so that truth would not be reshaped by popular demand. His calling was not to translate God's will into something agreeable, but to deliver it intact. That distinction matters. Revelation once softened to gain approval ceases to be revelation at all. This is why Moses' role unfolds around three defining responsibilities. First, Moses transmits truth. He does not negotiate it, revise it, or market it. He receives it and delivers it. In modern terms, Moses is not a therapist managing collective emotion. He is a messenger entrusted with diagnosis, and diagnosis is rarely comforting. Scripture confronts the listener with a piercing question. Do we want leaders who tell us what is right, or leaders who tell us what feels right? Second, Moses establishes covenant. A covenant is not a contract between equals. It is a moral architecture imposed from above, shaping a people from the inside out. Standing between God and Israel, Moses participates in the formation of identity itself. Without covenant, the people are merely a wandering mass. With covenant, they become a named nation, accountable not to preference, but to purpose. Third, Moses proclaims divine will. This is where his position becomes most misunderstood. To stand on God's side is not to abandon the people, it is to protect them. When divine will is bent to satisfy majority, opinion chaos follows. Moses stands firm, not because he lacks compassion, but because compassion without truth collapses into sentimentality. The image of Moses entering the cloud speaks volumes. Revelation is not received in noise. It is received in solitude, in fear, and in obedience without applause. Scripture quietly insists that there are moments when true leadership requires sacred isolations so that truth is not diluted, law is not compromised, and the voice of God is not drowned out by the roar of the crowd. In stark contrast to Moses, Aaron is never portrayed as a man of the mountain. He does not enter the cloud. He does not disappear into the terrifying silence where divine revelation is forged. Aaron remains below, embedded in the life of the people, shaped not by mystery, but by memory. His formation does not come from moments of transcendence, but from years of endurance. Aaron carries what Moses does not. He carries the memory of the whip. He carries the experience of slavery pressed into the body and the psyche. He carries the humiliation of living and laboring in the mud of Egypt alongside his people. These are not incidental details in the biblical narrative. They are the raw material from which his priesthood is formed. Here Scripture quietly reveals a profound principle. Priesthood does not demand elevation, it demands empathy. A priest is not simply someone who performs sacred rituals. A priest is someone who understands why human beings need forgiveness in the first place. Without that understanding, sacrifice becomes mechanical and religion becomes cold. Aaron understands human weakness not as an abstract doctrine, but as lived reality. He knows what fear feels like when freedom seems impossible. He knows how desperation erodes judgment. He knows how quickly people reach for false certainty when hope collapses. And because he knows this, he is capable of standing before God on behalf of the people in a way Moses cannot. Aaron represents humanity not at its best, but at its most fragile. Priesthood, then, is the disciplined practice of mercy. It requires more than compassion, but it cannot exist without it. The priest must see sin not only as law-breaking, but as the symptom of a fractured inner world. To view sin only as error invites punishment. To view it as brokenness invites healing. Aaron's role is rooted in this deeper vision of the human condition. This is why the priest must belong to the people he represents. He must share their language, their fears, their shame. A priest detached from suffering may speak accurately, but his words will lack weight. By contrast, someone who has stood in the same lines, felt the same hunger, and carried the same indignities, speaks with a gravity that cannot be taught. Yet Scripture refuses to romanticize this closeness. Empathy carries risk. To stand near the pain of the people is also to stand near their panic. The same sensitivity that enables mercy can also become vulnerability. When fear spreads through a crowd, it exerts pressure, subtle at first, then overwhelming. And a priest who listens too closely to the voice of the people may slowly begin to confuse that voice with the voice of God. Aaron embodies this tension. He is chosen because he understands the people. But that very understanding places him in danger of being shaped by their anxieties. Compassion, when untethered from truth, drifts into concession. Mercy without structure dissolves into appeasement. The biblical design does not hide this risk, it exposes it. Aaron is entrusted with priesthood, but not with revelation. He stands with the people, not above them. His role is essential, but it is not absolute. By limiting Aaron's authority, Scripture safeguards a fragile balance, one where mercy does not overwhelm truth, and truth does not crush those it seeks to restore. In this careful division, a deeper wisdom begins to emerge. Human beings require both the voice that speaks from the cloud and the presence that stands in the dust, and no single person is meant to carry both. When Moses and Aaron are placed side by side, a deliberate pattern begins to emerge. This is not a story about two personalities, but about two kinds of authority. One moves vertically from heaven to earth, the other moves horizontally from the people back toward God. And Scripture makes a quiet but radical claim: no human being is meant to carry both. Consider the first possibility. If Moses had been both the one who heard the voice of God and the high priest who controlled the altar law itself, would have become unchallengeable. The same man who declared, "This is God's command," would also decide how that command was enforced and how forgiveness was granted. In such a system, authority closes in on itself. There is no room left for correction, no space for accountability. Any objection can be silenced by invoking divine endorsement. Truth may still be spoken, but it would be protected from scrutiny. And that is where corruption quietly begins. Now consider the opposite scenario. If Aaron, the man who lived among the people, felt their fear and understood their fragility, had also been entrusted with shaping the law, truth would gradually bend under pressure. Standards would soften to preserve stability. Commands would shift to calm anxiety. When the voice of the crowd grows loud enough, even sacred boundaries can begin to feel negotiable. Law would no longer stand above the people, it would reflect them. These two failures point to the same conclusion. Absolute spiritual authority is not dangerous because human beings are unusually evil, but because they are unavoidably limited. No one is capable of holding perfect truth and perfect mercy at the same time without distortion. One will eventually overpower the other. Either mercy dissolves into concession, or truth hardens into domination. This is why Scripture divides power at its foundation, not to weaken leadership, but to preserve it. The separation between revelation and priesthood is a safeguard protecting truth from becoming untouchable and compassion from becoming lawless. God does not distribute authority this way because he distrusts humanity, but because he understands it. And here tension quietly builds. If Moses cannot absorb the fears of the people, and Aaron cannot anchor himself fully in revelation, what happens when crisis strikes? What happens when fear spreads, when silence from the mountain feels unbearable, and the pressure of the crowd demands immediate answers? At that moment, theory gives way to history, and the design will be tested not in abstraction, but in a single dangerous decision that reveals why this division of power was never optional. Aaron, the very man appointed as high priest, stands at the center of one of Scripture's most unsettling moments, the golden calf. This is not a side story, nor a minor moral lapse. It is a warning embedded in history, preserved not to condemn Aaron, but to expose the limits of empathy when it stands alone. The conditions of the failure matter. Moses is gone longer than expected. The mountain remains silent. God does not speak, and silence for a people newly freed from slavery becomes unbearable. Anxiety spreads, waiting feels like abandonment. The crowd does not begin with rebellion, but with uncertainty. We do not know what has happened. In that moment they turn to Aaron. Aaron is not seduced by a sophisticated pagan ideology. He does not publicly reject the God of Israel. What overwhelms him is something far more human: collective fear. He hears the tremor in their voices, feels the rising pressure to act, to stabilize, to give the people something tangible when faith feels empty, and out of compassion, he yields. Here Scripture delivers a hard truth. The one who understands the people's pain is also the one most vulnerable to their fear. Aaron knows their anxiety intimately. He has lived their suffering, and because he understands it so well, he chooses the fastest way to calm it. But relief achieved without revelation is never neutral. It always costs something. The golden calf is not merely an idol, it is a substitute for presence. The people cannot endure a God who is unseen and silent. They want something visible, manageable, responsive, something that answers immediately. When divine presence feels absent, human beings do not simply wait, they create replacements. The calf becomes a tool of reassurance, not worship. Aaron, acting as priest, prioritizes emotional stability over covenantal fidelity. His intent may not be malicious, but the result is devastating. This moment exposes why priesthood cannot carry legislative authority. When the representative of the people is also the source of law, truth becomes reactive. Standards shift to quiet fear. Revelation bends toward survival. Aaron's failure does not make him a villain. It makes him profoundly human. And Scripture's honesty in preserving this moment reveals its deeper wisdom. Compassion is essential to priesthood, but compassion untethered from revelation will eventually drift into concession. The golden calf stands as historical proof that empathy, while necessary, is insufficient to guard truth. This is why power remains divided. Mercy must have limits. Fear cannot be allowed to write doctrine. And the presence of God cannot be manufactured on demand without distorting faith itself. In the end, the truth emerges quietly, without spectacle, without shock. Moses was chosen to hear God. Aaron was chosen to carry the weight of human weakness, and neither was permitted to do both. This is not merely an ancient arrangement. It is a mirror held up to every generation, to religious institutions, to systems of leadership, and to our personal expectations of faith. We are often tempted to demand everything from one person: absolute truth and perfect compassion, unbending conviction, and limitless empathy. But Scripture suggests that such a burden was never meant for human shoulders. Only the Messiah could carry it without breaking. So the question now turns toward us. Do we value truth more even when it is uncomfortable, or do we value understanding more even when it risks compromise? And how often do we expect our leaders, our pastors, or even our heroes to carry a weight that history itself warns against? That was history. But what do you think? I genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Share your perspective in the comments below. We read them and we learn from them. And if you enjoy thoughtful explorations like this, where Scripture is taken seriously, not sensationally, consider subscribing to the channel. Not for clicks, but for the ongoing conversation. Because the Bible doesn't tell stories about perfect people. It tells the story of a God who understands human limits and designs wisdom to protect us from ourselves.